I was folding laundry when my grandmother died, and I knew the exact moment it happened because the room filled with roses. Not a faint trace, not a ghost of a scent drifting in from somewhere. A wall of fragrance so dense, so fully formed that I stopped moving and turned around, certain someone had walked into the house carrying an enormous bouquet. There was no one. There was no bouquet. There had never been a single rosebush in that house in all the 18 years I had lived in it. No candle, no perfume bottle on the shelf, no open window to the street, just laundry and the smell of roses and the absolute conviction that something had changed in the world. 40 minutes later, the phone rang. I want to be careful about who I am before I tell you the rest of this story, because I know how it sounds. And I know what happens when you say, I smelled something and I knew someone had died. I am a forensic accountant. Numbers are not just my profession, they are my temperament. I am the person at family gatherings who checks the holiday itinerary for scheduling conflicts. I have never read a horoscope with anything other than mild contempt. I am not a person who has premonitions. I am a person who has spreadsheets. And so when I tell you what I experienced, not once, but 3 times over the following 6 days, I am not asking you to believe me based on feeling. I am asking you to follow the evidence, the way I would, the way I have to, because the evidence is what finally broke something open in me that had been sealed for 34 years. My grandmother and I had a language that required no words. That is the only way I know how to say it. She was a woman who had worked her hands rough in a garden for 60 years, and the thing she grew most was roses, a variety so particular to her yard that her neighbours 2 doors down once asked her to take cuttings because they had never seen that colour anywhere else. Not quite pink, not quite coral. The kind of colour that seems to have an opinion about itself. She lived 40 minutes from my house. She had been healthy by all reports when we last spoke 3 days before. I need to tell you what the phone call said, but before I do, I need to tell you what happened to the smell first, because the smell didn't leave when the phone rang. It stayed. It moved. And that is the part that transformed me from a grieving granddaughter into a woman who will never again be entirely comfortable with the word coincidence. She had been found in her garden chair, not in distress, not in pain, simply gone, the way a flame goes out when there is no more air to feed it. Peaceful, the paramedic said. The kind of death people pray for on behalf of the people they love most. The time of death was estimated to within a 30-minute window. A window that sat with unambiguous precision directly over the moment the laundry room filled with roses. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in the dark and I argued with myself in the language I know best. Coincidence, proximity to a scented product I'd forgotten, olfactory hallucination triggered by grief. I built the entire case. I assigned each hypothesis a probability. I ran the numbers in my head the way I run everything. By 3 a.m, the case had fallen apart because the smell came back. Not in the laundry room this time. In the kitchen the next morning, while I was standing at the counter with a cup of coffee and thinking about nothing in particular, just there. As sudden and complete as the first time. 30 seconds, maybe 40, and then gone again. As if something had passed close and kept walking. The 3rd time, I was in my car. The 4th, at my desk at work. Each time, no source. Each time, that exact colour of fragrance, not roses in general, not a perfume that approximates roses, but the specific botanical character of that unrepeatable variety she had grown in her yard for 30 years. I would know it in a blind test. I would know it on a witness stand. By the 5th time, I had stopped arguing. By the 6th, something in me had started to listen. It was on the 6th day, standing in the middle of her emptied kitchen, sorting through what would go to charity and what would come home with family, that the smell arrived again. And this time, it did not come and go. It settled. It gathered itself around me the way arms gather around a person who is crying and does not know how to ask for comfort. And I sat down on the kitchen floor, right there among the cardboard boxes, and I closed my eyes. What I saw, I do not call a dream. I do not call it imagination. I do not have a clinical term for it, and I am done pretending that the absence of a clinical term means the absence of the thing. What I saw was an opening, a window torn in the fabric of whatever I thought I understood about time, and through it, a glimpse of something so clear, so fully realised, so structurally coherent, that the word vision feels like an understatement. She was standing in a field, not a metaphorical field, not a vague, luminous expanse. A field with the texture of a specific afternoon, the particular quality of light that exists for about 20 minutes between 4 o'clock and the moment the sun begins to consider horizon. Long gold light that comes in at an angle and makes everything it touches look like the original version of itself. The field was in full flower, not manicured, not arranged, wildly, extravagantly, unself-consciously blooming, the way things bloom when they have not been taught to apologise for it. Every variety she had ever grown was there, and things she had never grown, things I had no name for, in colours that seemed to have been invented specifically for this landscape. And the smell. The smell was the same smell, the same signature, magnified by 1,000 and yet somehow not overwhelming, the way the sun is the source of light without being a source of pain. She was young, not young as in reduced to some earlier version, young as in completed. The way a sentence is complete when it finally has the right word in it. Every decade the years had borrowed from her, the deepened lines, the slowing gait, the careful way she'd started to lower herself into chairs, all of it returned. Not erased as though it had never happened, but redeemed, as though it had always been leading here. She stood upright in a way I had not seen since childhood, and she was looking out over the field with an expression that I can only describe as recognition. The expression of someone who has arrived somewhere they always suspected was waiting for them. I watched her and I understood something I had not understood before. That what I was seeing was not a memory, and it was not a fantasy. What I was seeing was a forecast, a precise transmission of what is to come, delivered by something that operates entirely outside the boundaries of what I have spent my career calling evidence. And she was not alone. The field was full. People standing, people moving, people folding into each other's arms with the unhurried certainty of those who know the gap is finally and permanently closed. Not desperate embraces. The desperate kind belongs to people who are afraid the moment will end. These were the embraces of arrival, of permanence, of I am here and you are here and this is not going to be interrupted. I watched a woman, young, radiant, absolutely sure-footed in her own skin, open her arms and receive into them a child who ran across the grass with the specific momentum of a small body that has been saving up velocity. The woman buried her face in the child's hair and held there, and held there, and held there, and her shoulders shook once with something that was not quite crying and not quite laughing, but lived in the same neighbourhood as both. Some losses, I understood, are not undone. They are answered, and the answer, when it finally comes, is as complete as the loss was total. An older man sat in the grass with his eyes closed, face turned toward the light. Beside him, a woman who had clearly been waiting, not with impatience, but with the settled serenity of someone who knew the timing had always been arranged, sat down next to him and took his hand. He opened his eyes. They looked at each other for a long moment. No words were the appropriate scale. And then there were the animals. They moved through that field the way laughter moves through a room, not directed, not owned, not going anywhere in particular and going everywhere at once. dogs bounding in wide arcs between clusters of people, pushing their heads into any open hand, racing across the grass with an abandonment that seemed to say, this is what we were always running toward. Not a person, the freedom itself. The horses stood in the far distance at first, and then I watched them come. Not galloping, not performing, simply walking through the gathering with a presence that was both immense and completely unhurried, and the people reached out as they passed, and the horses did not shy away. Smaller creatures moved through the tall grass at the edges. Birds settled on shoulders and lifted off again and settled elsewhere. The whole scene breathed with the kind of harmony you feel in your chest before you have words for it. That wordless recognition that things are as they were designed to be. Nothing in that field was afraid. That detail stopped me cold. In 34 years of living on Earth, I had never been in a room where nothing was afraid. Not a hospital, not a church, not a house on a holiday where every adult at the table was pretending to a peace they were not fully in possession of. This field was the first place I had ever witnessed where fear was simply absent, not suppressed, not hidden behind good manners, but structurally absent, the way cold is absent from a room with a steady fire. But she turned. My grandmother turned, and she looked at me. Not the way someone looks at something they're glad to see, but the way someone looks at something they've been carrying a message for. And what she communicated, without a single syllable, is the thing that altered every remaining assumption I had about what this life is actually for. There was a moment, in the centre of that communication, that wordless transmission from her to me, when I saw myself, not my body, my ledger. That's the only word a forensic accountant would use. The full accounting of what I had spent my years here investing in, and what I had left on the table because I was busy, or guarded, or convinced that the careful management of time was the same as the wise use of it. I was efficient with people I loved. I returned calls when I had bandwidth. I attended gatherings when the calendar permitted. I was there, technically, for most of the events that mattered. Birthdays, holidays, the occasional crisis. But there and present are not synonymous. And whatever I was shown in that field made the distinction impossible to ignore. I had been physically occupying my life without inhabiting it. Managing proximity without committing to closeness. And the message that came from her was not accusation. It was something more precise and harder to deflect. It was simply, you already know what matters. You've always known. You've just been prioritizing the ledger over the life. I had spent decades building a reputation for clarity, and what that field showed me was that I had been perfectly clear about the wrong things. There was another dimension to what she communicated, something I want to be careful to say exactly right, because it is the piece that shifted everything. She was not waiting for me to perfect a doctrine. She was not waiting for me to attach myself to the right institution, or recite the right formulas, or convince the right people that I belonged to the right category. What she was pointing me toward, and what everything in that field seemed to confirm, was something more fundamental than any of that. A genuine, unperformed, daily turning toward the one who made it all. Not religion as performance, not belief as identity. Seeking as a way of living. The kind of seeking that changes how you treat the ordinary Tuesday. The kind that makes you less likely to ration your attention with the people you love, because you understand that the attention is the offering. The years we have here are not the destination, they are the preparation. And the question that field posed, the question it is still posing to me every morning, is not what have you accomplished, but what have you become. The kitchen floor came back, the cardboard boxes, the dust motes in the late afternoon light coming through the window she had stood at every morning for 50 years. The smell, still present but beginning to lift now, gently, like a fog that has delivered its weather and has no further instructions. I sat there for a long time. I want to give you the rest of the evidence because I promised you I would follow it, and I intend to honour that. When I called my aunt that evening to talk through the logistics of the estate, she mentioned something in passing. The way people mention things they don't yet know are significant. She said that when the neighbours had gone into the garden to check on my grandmother, the ones who had asked for those rose cuttings years ago, they had remarked on something. They had said the garden smelled extraordinarily strong that afternoon. Unusually so. One of them had said, half joking, "It smells like someone turned the whole garden up to full volume." The afternoon. Not the evening, not the previous day. That afternoon. The time of death window. I have thought about this a great deal since then. I am constitutionally incapable of not thinking about things a great deal. And what I have arrived at is this. That smell was not random. It was not coincidence assembling itself into a meaningful shape by accident. The probability calculus simply does not support that. What it was, I believe, is something the shared death experience researchers call a contact signal. A bridge built at the exact moment of crossing between someone who is leaving and someone who is loved. Built with the only vocabulary she had that I could not rationalise away. She knew me. She knew what would and would not reach me. She did not send me a feeling. She sent me evidence in the form she was certain I would notice. And then she sent it 6 more times, for 6 days, until I sat down on a kitchen floor and finally stopped processing and started receiving. I am a different kind of accountant now. I still do the work. I still check the itinerary. But I have started keeping a different kind of ledger. One that tracks not what was accomplished, but what was given. The conversation I made time for. The visit I stopped rescheduling. The moment I put the phone face down and looked at the person in front of me as if they were, in fact, the most important data point in the room. Because they are. And I almost needed to lose someone irreplaceable to understand that what she spent 60 years growing, those roses that had no name and no adequate description, that colour that seemed to have an opinion about itself, that was not the garden. That was the lesson. That was her whole theology right there in the yard. Something beautiful, tended faithfully, is its own kind of argument for the existence of a generous God. I am speaking to you now, directly, without the hedge of professional detachment I used to keep between myself and anything I couldn't quantify. If you are carrying someone's absence today, if there is a name that lives in the back of your throat and surfaces at unexpected moments, in grocery stores, in the car, in the specific silence of a Sunday afternoon, I want to tell you something from a woman who spent 3 decades not believing in things she couldn't put in a column. They are not in pain. They are not in some anxious waiting room, wondering if you've moved on or whether you still think about them. The moment their eyes closed here, time stopped for them, not as a punishment, not as a loss, but as a mercy. A dreamless, painless, total rest with no consciousness of its own duration. For them, there is no long gap. There is no in-between they must endure. There is only the last breath. And then the morning. That morning. The one I saw through the open window of my grandmother's kitchen. The field. The light at 4 o'clock. The bodies rebuilt from the inside out. The faces turning toward the people they love with an expression I can only describe as, "I need be here." The sleep of those we've lost is sweet, and the waking, when it comes, will be sweeter than anything either of us has the vocabulary for yet. The most consequential thing you can do in the years between now and that morning is to pursue the one who arranged all of it, not through the right label or the correct affiliation. Not by performing a devotion that exists for the benefit of onlookers, through the unpolished, daily, sometimes stumbling act of genuinely wanting to know the Creator, and letting that wanting shape how you move through the world, who you call, who you visit, which moments you decide to actually be inside instead of just adjacent to. That pursuit is the preparation, and the one who built that field is already watching it with more patience and more generosity than any of us have yet understood. My grandmother tended her roses for 60 years. She never stopped believing they were worth the daily work. She was right about more than roses. Tell me in the comments, who is the person you cannot wait to walk through that field with? I want to know their name. Or just their initial, if that's all you can manage tonight. I will read every single one.